I feel like going on. I feel like going on. Though trials come on every hand, I feel like going on. Brother Heath L. Griot's Corner, Back to Black Classic Film Review. And whenever we hear this song, I feel like going on. It's featured strategically throughout the course of this movie that we are about to review, the 1991 classic film, The Five Heartbeats. This story, written by Robert Townsend and Keenan Ivory Waynes, captures this essence of five friends, two who are biological brothers who come together and formulate a group in the 60s called the Five Heartbeats. What's interesting about the making of this film, as we are about to review it, is that it was filmed and made during the era of Spike Lee's School Days and Do the Right Thing and John Singleton's Boys in the Hood and later on Higher Learning. Those films that are iconic in and of themselves that capture what Black life was and dealing with race relations during the 90s. And here, Robert Townsend, who's known for his specials, the Parenthood series, television series, of course, the iconic comedy classic Hollywood Shuffle, Keenan Ivory Waynes, another comedic genius known for In Living Color, did I'm Gonna Get You Sucker, these kinds of films, and that they came together to write this beautiful musical drama cast in the setting of it is in the 60s and the formulation of this group called the Five Heartbeats. There are some who would even particularly consider this to be an extended or a similar story to that of The Temptations, primarily with the character of Eddie Kane Jr. Some would relate it to the personality of the legendary David Ruffin. And even though there may be some elements within this story that may give one to think of The Temptations, this story was written so beautifully that it stands alone. The Five Heartbeats has its own identity separate of that from The Temptations. And this is what is captured so remarkably in this film, how they come together. They are discovered by their manager, Jimmy Potter, who was portrayed by the late, great Chuck Patterson, and how they get their career started. And of course, Jimmy Potter lets them know that they have to get their choreography together. And so he brings in Sarge, who's portrayed by the legendary actor and choreographer from the Nicholas brothers, Harold Nicholas, his wife, Eleanor, who's portrayed by the legendary actress, Diane Carroll. It gives a sense of family. It gives a sense of bond. Of course, Robert Townsend portraying Duck, Michael Wright portraying Eddie Kane Jr., Leon Richardson portraying JT, Tico Wells portraying Choir Boy, and Harry Lennox portraying Dresser. They come together and they formulate this group, but it also talks about the bond of brotherhood that they had, the fellowship that they had. In their first tour, if you remember in the movie, when Dresser discovers that his girlfriend is pregnant and he's trying to figure out if he needs to leave the group, he needs to get a regular job because he has a child coming. And of course, Duck and Eddie are sitting in the hallway with him, and they put money in his hand. And at first he tries not to not to take it, but they sort of give it to him as if to say, there's no question that we're going to support you. And it showed that bond of brotherhood that they had. Big Red, I got to talk about the character of Big Red, portrayed iconically by the actor Hawthorne James, who probably, unfortunately, has been typecast to a degree, because most of us within the Black community, if we ever even see Hawthorne James, the first thing that is probably going to come to mind for us is, and my office hours are from 9 to 5. I mean, when we think about his portrayal of Big Red, and of course his iconic portrayal, but also the nuances and the complexities and at times hypocrisies within the music industry, and how Big Red manipulates and tries to manipulate Jimmy out of being their manager. By this time, Eddie, who has become strung out on cocaine and strung out on his own ego, has been sort of approached by Big Red to do a solo deal with Big Red. Of course, Big Red threatening Jimmy that he can replace all of the heartbeats and bring new guys in to sing. And of course, Jimmy stands up to Big Red at his unfortunate demise, and he stands up to Big Red and is subsequently murdered, with Big Red being the co-conspirator behind it. It showed the dynamic. This movie captured the dynamic of them meeting together, and Dresser, the four of them in an alleyway, and then Dresser walks in and of course discovers that Eddie, and reveals to the group that Eddie had made a side deal with Big Red, and confronts him emotionally, passionately. And you all remember the iconic scene where they're holding on to each other. And Dresser says, "What did he ever do to you? What did he ever do to you?" And they're weeping and crying together. And it showed that betrayal. It was a betrayal, because the movie deals with love, brotherhood, family, bond, betrayal, and ultimately forgiveness and restoration. And it dealt with that complexity. Some other iconic personalities or actors that was in this movie, of course, John Canada, Terrell, who plays Flash, Tressa Thomas, who plays Duck's baby sister. That beautiful scene, funny but yet iconic, of Duck trying to write this song, and so she helps Duck. She's trying to clean up the room, and she helps Duck put the song together, and she ends up singing. Carla Brothers, who portrays Tanya Sawyer, and we'll get to that exchange in a minute. Troy Byer, who portrays Baby Doll. Teresa Randall, who portrays Brenda. And there were so many, these characterizations were so profound within the movie. And again, it deals with the relationship factor. The relationship that, of course, Eddie initially disintegrates before his four friends, his four brothers. The drug addiction has taken a hold of him. And after the untimely murder of Jimmy Potter and the conviction and arrest of Big Red, he decides to not sing any longer and leave the group. They get Flash to become the member to replace Eddie, who becomes somewhat of the lead singer. And that heartbreaking scene where they are in concert, and after the concert, they're going to their cars, and then Eddie is at the gate, dressed in one of their old outfits and begging, if you will, telling the guys that he was ready to come back. And clearly, he's still strung out. He's still not together mentally, emotionally, or spiritually. And Dresser walks off, but it's Choir Boy who comes and puts a card in his hand, tells him to give him a call. The relationship between Choir Boy and his father, who is a pastor, and his father very much disagrees with him being with the Five Heartbeats, telling him that he's turning on his calling, on his responsibility in the church. But yet the counterbalance to that was Choir Boy's mother, who encourages her son and tells her son to go on and bring her back a Grammy and that kind of thing, and just sort of let him know that you have permission to go and seek your dream. It showed that dynamic. The another heartbreaking dynamic, of course, in the relationship factor within the movie is, of course, Duck's engagement to Tanya Sawyer, again portrayed by Carla Brothers, and she ends up having an affair with his brother JT. And of course, Duck discovering, you all remember the scene, he comes to the hotel and the guy at the hotel decides, or I should say the bellhop in front of the hotel says, wow, can I get your autograph? And he says, 2 heartbeats in one night. And Duck is looking at him because he follows Tanya to the hotel and discovers that she's going there to meet JT. And the confrontation that he has with JT after they receive, I think they have been inducted into a Hall of Fame ceremony, and Duck confronts JT and calls out him and Tanya's relationship, and that splinters the group. It splinters the relationship. The group disbands after that, and so it's again iconically done. You never would have imagined that Robert Townsend and Keenen Ivory Wayans would come together to write and produce such an iconic drama. And again, it did have its comedic moments throughout. Of course, it had to. When you got Keenen Ivory Wayans and Robert Townsend together, you're going to have those comedic moments when they first go on stage to perform. One of their first performances, and the group, the Falcons, wants to hinder them being received in this. I think it was a talent show, and so they have their girlfriends sit out front to sort of boo them and not encourage them. And initially, it seems to work, and then, of course, when Robert Townsend Duck knocks the piano player out the way and starts playing, and they start harmonizing like they did on the corner, like they would do in the alley. And the girls who were there to boo them end up getting turned on by them at the very end of that performance. Classic comedic performance that was done in that. So many others that was featured in the film that has you laughing in the midst of it being a serious drama. You still have these moments of them coming together and creating these moments of comedy that, of course, only added to the essence of this movie. Again, this movie was iconic. In fact, I think it was the ending of the movie. I think really what solidifies this as a classic film that, unfortunately, according to Rotten Tomatoes, the critics who reviewed this film did not give it good ratings, but nevertheless, the audience gave reviews of 90% and up for the 5 Heartbeats. And it's the ending that, for me, is so very touching. First, after years after they disband, Choir Boy writes a letter to Duck inviting him to his church. He has a surprise for him. Duck arrives, and the pastor is giving some remarks, and then the choir comes up to sing. Duck has his head down, and he hears, I feel like going on. Again, Townsend has this song at different strategic points throughout the movie, and this is probably the most strategic place that this song is heard. Again, Duck looks up, and there in the choir, Eddie, no longer addicted, Eddie, who has turned his life around, Eddie Kane Jr., who is now walking in a new purpose for his life. And of course, they all embrace. A baby doll is there, and they all embrace, and they're talking. And then Eddie pulls Duck to the side. I heard about you and JT. And of course, Duck is resisting, saying, no, I don't have nothing to say. And it's Eddie Kane, the one who did the most betraying, the one who was instrumental in bringing fractured hindrances in the relationship within the group. It's Eddie that encourages Duck to remind him that he knows what it's like to need a second chance. He knows what it's like to need to be forgiven and restored. And of course, Duck goes and him and JT reconcile. They see each other after all these years. And then you would think that a movie like this probably would have ended with them coming back together and becoming a success again. But that's not how the movie ends. The movie ends with them at a cookout at JT's house. They're all there, and they're all having a good time. And the kids are watching Video Soul. Many of us remember back in the 80s, Donnie Simpson, Washington, D.C. native, was the host for the iconic Video Soul show. And on the show that the kids are watching, Flash, who had left the group, started Flash and the Five Horsemen, who were these white guys with white wigs on, and they're singing. And JT is turned off by it. He turns the TV off and says, "This isn't music." And I think his wife says to him, Brenda, portrayed by Teresa Randall, says, "Well, why don't you show them what real music is?" And he says, that's nothing but a word. And he stands up, holds his hand out, calls up the group. One by one, they come and they put their hands on top of each other. But the only one who hasn't walked up yet is Eddie Kane. And they say, "Come on, Eddie." And Eddie says, y'all want to sing with old Eddie? And Dresser, out of all of the ones in the group, Dresser, the one who was hurt the most, who was that much angered with what Eddie did, he says, "Yeah, we're sure." And it showed the reunion of the bond of brotherhood, which was the essence of what the Five Heartbeats was all about. If you've ever seen it, that scene, and so many other scenes, is so touching in the movie, because it ended with restoration. It ended with forgiveness. It ended with that bond that they had originally when they came together years earlier to formulate this group. Again, this is an iconic film. To those who have never seen it, I would simply say to you, you need to go check it out. You will be blessed tremendously. For those of you who've seen it, and maybe you haven't viewed it in a long time, let's take a look at this again and find out why we all fell in love with this iconic story, The Five Heartbeats. Well, that's really all that needs to be said about The Five Heartbeats. This is Brother Heath L with the Griot's Corner, Back to Black classic film review. Go check out this film, and do know that we will be coming back with a few more reviews, particularly during the conclusion of Black History Month. Back to Black classic films. Peace and blessings.